Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Max Miller. This is Tasting History Live. It's a Q&A where we're going to be making a modern recipe for baked pumpkin donuts, which technically, a lot of people would say aren't even donuts because they're just in the shape of a donut. So the reason that I'm doing this, a modern recipe, a lot of people are like, why are you doing a modern recipe? Is because, first of all, can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure that I'm able to be heard and not just screaming into the abyss. Yes, all right. So the reason that we're doing a modern recipe was I wanted to do another Q&A because you guys really liked it seemed. And I wanted to kind of cover some of the recipes that I'm never going to be able to do as a full episode. There just isn't maybe enough history, or there isn't a good recipe that I've found. And it might be something that I really enjoy that I think other people would enjoy, but again, just isn't going to make for a good episode. And my pumpkin donuts that I make every year around this time are them. So, but we will be talking a little bit about the history of donuts. And I'll show you how to make this modern version of, well, it's only modern, modern version of baked pumpkin donuts. The nice thing is it's really, really easy. It's something that everybody likes, as long as you like pumpkin. So, you know, can't go wrong with that. If you have questions, put them into the comments. I know a lot of people have sent me things, but put them into the comments. We'll get to them as we go through. Jose is going to be helping me a lot on that. So yeah, I actually had a question for you all. So I think that, because I was going to say, good morning, Tasting History fans or Tasting History viewers. I think we need a name. I think the group of people that watches Tasting History needs a name. So if you have ideas, throw them out. My creativity is stifled on that. All right. So the first thing you need to do is to preheat your oven, which I've already started preheating. So, okay, yesterday I did a live stream. I'm totally going off topic. Yesterday I did a live stream with John Townsend from at the Nutmeg Tavern over on his channel, Townsend's. Mind blown. It was such an amazing experience. He's like a hero of mine, and a really big influence in just why I got into doing this and going on to YouTube. So we were supposed to do it on Friday, but they had technical difficulties with their internet, so we ended up having to move it to Saturday. So I've been thinking, all right, we're not going to have any internet issues, no technical difficulties. Well, this morning, our internet is working, but our AC, our air conditioner, went out, which in a lot of the world right now, not a big deal. But in Southern California, it's still rather warm. It's going to be in the upper 80s, I think, today. So I'm now turning on the oven with no AC. So pray for me. All right, let's go through the ingredients that you'll need for your pumpkin donuts. These are for the donut portion of the donut. So we have 1/2 cup or 100 grams of vegetable oil. Now, you can use other types of oil. I use vegetable oil because it doesn't really impart any flavor. Don't use something like peanut oil. Don't use extra virgin olive oil. It's going to give a little bit too much flavor, but you can use any kind of flavorless oil. Eggs, 3 large eggs, beaten somewhat. Sugar, just a little bit, just 1.5 cups or 300 grams of sugar. It's actually a ton of sugar, but I like sugar. Pumpkin. Now, pumpkin usually comes in cans that, the small can here in the US at least is about 425 grams. We're not going to use that much, but you do want to use canned pumpkin. Fresh pumpkin is wonderful for some things, but it actually doesn't have as strong a flavor typically as canned pumpkin, which is odd. It's ready. I am going to be making something very soon that will be on a full episode of Tasting History where we'll be using a full pumpkin. But for this, for time's sake, we're going to use canned pumpkin puree. So we're going to use about 340 grams or 1.5 cups. Like I said, that's not quite a full can. If you end up using a full can, it's fine, not a big deal, but maybe back off the oil a little bit because it will add a lot more liquid to it. Flour, 2 cups or 240 grams of flour, and then lots of spices. Now, yesterday, so the first recipe that I ever did for baked pumpkin donuts came from King Arthur flour. Amazing. But one thing that I definitely always found myself changing is the amount of spices. Because like John Townsend and I were talking about yesterday, we like our spices. So I pretty much doubled, if not more, all of the spices that were in the first recipe that I used years ago. This is quite a bit different from that one. So we have cinnamon. I'm using 1 teaspoon. I would actually maybe even use a little bit more, but 1 teaspoon for this. Nutmeg. Kudos to John Townsend with this. Nutmeg, a 1/2 teaspoon, and a 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger. And then we need some salt. Between 1 and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. You can kind of play with that. And then about 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. Baking powder. 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Also, all of this should be in the description of the video. I have all of the ingredients, all of the procedure. Everything should be down there. So don't be writing it down. Don't worry about that. So the first thing we're going to do then, like I said, this is a really easy recipe. You take all of the ingredients except for the flour and put them into a bowl. I'm using a stand mixer. You don't have to use a stand mixer. You can use whatever you want. But we just literally put everything in the bowl. So while I'm doing this, let's talk about where donuts came from. So the first things kind of akin to a donut, actually, I talk about in one of my favorite episodes, a recent episode that I did on, it was called Farts of Portugal, Portuguese farts, which was an Elizabethan kind of meatball. But I talk about other things, including another dish called Portuguese farts or nun farts or petit butin, which is farts of a whore, which were essentially early donut holes. They were little round balls of dough that were deep fried and then usually sugared, and they puffed up. So they were a little bit like early balls of dough, or early donuts. But the first donuts, even though they weren't called that, were actually called oelekeks or oelekeks, and they came from the Dutch, who were, because as we all know from There Might Be Giants, even old New York was once New Amsterdam. When the Dutch ran New Amsterdam, which is now Manhattan, they had these oelekeks, and they were essentially, they kind of looked, at least in the descriptions, we don't have pictures, but in the descriptions, they were big, kind of round, but flattened on the top, sweet, puffed up fried dough. So kind of looking like a jelly donut might today. And then one of the first, not the first, because there actually is a recipe for them. I don't have it, but we know that it exists. From 1800, but soon after, in 1809, Longfellow, I'm gonna quote him, I need to look, I don't memorize everything. Sorry, not Longfellow, Washington Irving, who did Sleepy Hollow, and he lived in the New York area. He wrote, "Sometimes the table was graced with immense apple pies, or saucers full of preserved peaches and pears, but it was always sure to boast of an enormous dish of balls of sweetened dough, fried in hog's fat, called doughnuts, or oelekeks, a delicious kind of cake at present scarcely known in the city, excepting in genuine Dutch families." So that is the first time that they're called donuts, which is pretty cool. Nut at the point in time was just referred to as a small kind of cake, so it had nothing to do with nuts. All right, so once everything is in the bowl, we just hook it on up here to our wonderful magical KitchenAid stand mixer, and we just put the paddle on, and then we mix. Go on low, otherwise things will spill out, as they just did when I went straight to high. Do we have any questions?
Where did the love of history come from? How do you know you wanted to do this type of channel?
Where did my love of history come from? Is this too loud? Can we hear with it? Because otherwise we'll just have to pause because it needs to do its work. It's about done. Where did my love of history come from, and why what?
Where did the love of history come from, and how did you know you wanted to do this type of channel?
Where did my love of history come from, and how did I know that I wanted to do this type of channel? My love of history came from, I think it started actually with my grandpa. So my grandfather was in World War II. He was like worked in the medical corps during World War II, and he had all these great stories as a kid of him being in England and France and later Germany. That he would tell me, and I would just sit there and marvel at these stories that were from a world so foreign to me, even though, you know, it was only 40 years before, 50 years before I was a little kid. It was so foreign to me, but it was also sitting right in front of me. And that was where my love of history came from, because I loved stories, and that's all that history is. It's just stories. And why I decided to do this channel, I wanted to share stories with people, I guess. I guess that's a good answer, right? So now that everything is mixed, it doesn't take very long, we're going to put the flour in, but just about a third or even half at a time. And you can do this by hand. It's probably smarter to do it by hand, but go slow. You do not want to overwork the flour, otherwise they're not going to be good. So you want to mix it in. You know what? Actually, I am going to do it by hand. You want to mix it in until it is just done, just mixed in. Otherwise, they get all chewy, and nobody likes a chewy donut. So yeah, we have a Tastorians Unite. Thank you, Daniel Fritsch. Fritsch? I like that. I appreciate that. Appreciate the super chat. Oh, I wanted to bring up, a lot of people have been asking when I'm going to have merchandise. And the answer, hopefully, is on Tuesday's video. That looks to be when, I actually had hoped it would be ready for today, but it looks like it'll be ready on Tuesday. So we'll actually have a merch store up. At first, it's going to be very limited, just stuff with the Tasting History logo, but I've got some really cool things, garum themed and butter themed and stuff coming right behind it in the next few weeks. So definitely keep an eye out for the merch. Also, I want to thank my patrons from Patreon. They've been so supportive, and it does provide, you know, kind of a bit of a stable income to make the videos, so I know how much I can spend on ingredients and tools and things like that, because as John Townsend was saying yesterday, YouTube is not predictable, you know. So really appreciate the patrons out there, my patrons. Yeah, so now that we have our, like I said, it doesn't take very much. I don't know if you can see this. It's a gorgeous orange color. You pretty much just need to kind of get rid of the lumps. And if there are a few lumps, that's all right. But what you want to make sure is that it's all off of the bottom. I'm talking about the flour. You don't want the flour there on the bottom.
Christopher T said he left so much baking powder.
I did leave a fair amount of baking powder behind. It's probably about a 1/16. It actually, I don't think it's not as much as it looks like, actually. It's because these wooden things, it's probably, here, I'll get all of it out. And it's just enough to go onto the tip of my finger. That's it. We'll toss it in. It's not, it doesn't really matter. As long as you get to the crux of it. The thing with baking powder is the older it gets, the less potent it is. So if your baking powder is old, you should either use a little bit more or go get new baking powder. You really should like refresh your baking powder every 6 to 9 months once you open it. All right, so then.
Hillary asked, you never showed your sambo cod video. How did that taste?
My sambo cod video. So I get this a lot, is when I made the sambo cod, I didn't taste it on camera. And I was talking about this yesterday in the live stream on Townsend's. When I first started the channel, I called it Tasting History, and yet I did not taste the food on camera. So I'm a little slow on the uptake, but people commented and said, why aren't you tasting your food on camera. And that made it so starting around, I think, the 4th or 5th video, I started tasting the food on camera, which was really nice. So it tasted wonderful. Even Jose liked it, and that's saying something because he does not like a lot of things that I make, at least the historical things. Thank you, Kevin. I'm not going to try to. I am going to try to say your last name, Chakowski.
Like Mike Wazowski.
Mike Wazowski. I don't know, but thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. So yeah, sembocade, wonderful. Make it. Especially, it's nice and light. It doesn't taste anything like a modern day cheesecake. It's delicious though. But yeah, so my early videos, I'm not tasting on camera, which annoyed a lot of people. But I changed my ways. So now, at this point, you're going to need to, you can either spray down some donut pans or butter them. I butter them and then put some flour in there, and then I put them in the freezer for about 10 minutes just to kind of firm up the butter. You need to get the batter into the pans. The best way to do this is by piping it in, but I'm slow with piping, and so we're trying to kind of move things along since I'm baking an entire thing on camera today. So I'm going to be a little bit messy and just spoon it into the pan. So you want to get it almost up to the top and then kind of level it off. In the meantime, we have to wonder how donuts got their holes. So the story goes that a ship captain named Hanson Gregory in 1847 claimed that his mother used to make his crew donuts, but remember, they didn't have holes at the time. Well, the way that she would make them, I was kind of mean because he's saying bad things about his mom's cooking, but the way that she would make them, they weren't quite cooked in the middle, and he didn't like the raw dough, so he would take the top to a tin pepper can, like a little tin pepper holder, and cut out the center of the donut. And 50 years later, when giving an interview, he tells the story, and he is quoted as saying, and who knows what he actually sounded like, but seeing as he's a ship captain from New England, I think he sounded a bit like this. He said, "The first donut hole ever seen by mortal eyes were those on his ship." Again, probably didn't sound like that, but in my head he did. So, like I said, this is actually going a lot faster than when I pipe them because I'm really slow at piping. It's actually getting the stuff in the bag that I'm slow at, and I tend to make even a bigger mess than I am right now, but it is what it is. I'm not a professional cook. I bet a pastry chef could just pop these out like nobody's business. But I'm not a pastry chef.
Andrew Benson says he loved the stream yesterday and he's very excited to support your channel.
Thank you, Andrew Benson.
And then Liz watched your stream yesterday on Townsend's and said, "Why didn't you say black rat?"
Black rat. Okay, so the black rat. I was shocked at how many comments and things that I got about the black rat. So this was on the episode, the Indian episode where I cooked from the Manosalasa, and he mentions black rat fit for a king, and people just went crazy wanting me to make this black rat. I'm not ever making the black rat, but I should have mentioned that yesterday on the channel. It totally slipped my mind because it's gross, right? I don't know, but I guess it would have been perfect to mention when I was talking about things that I'm just never going to make. I thought yesterday was really interesting. He has a wonderful take on things. You know, his channel is so specific. It's 18th century. It's not all, but pretty much all American. I actually got one of his books where he cooked from a Spanish cookbook, which was pretty cool. I think it was Spanish New World, but you know, it was just so much fun to chat with him, and I hope that I get to do it again, hopefully in person when all of this craziness is over. This is exciting TV, everyone. Watching me spoon batter into donut molds. I feel like one of those old PBS telethons where they weren't that exciting, you know, with Lawrence Welk. But there it is.
Stan Brown 32 says, "You're amazing."
Thank you, Stan Brown 32. You know what? We had some questions actually that popped up that people had sent earlier on. So I'm going to scroll down and talk about them. Evan Switch said, did I major in history in college or did I study baking? Which came first? So I did study history in college, but I was not a history major, though I actually took more history classes than a history major would have needed. But my major and my degree is in classical voice. So completely different, but I loved history so much, I just kept taking history classes, mainly British history classes. We had some really nice teachers there at Arizona State. My love of baking didn't come until about 5 years ago. This is why it's taking me so long to do things and why I'm just so messy. Because I'm not trained as a baker. Everything I learned from baking, I learned from the Great British Bake Off. By the way, I'm gonna wet my finger. Like if you get stuff in the holes and stuff, just kind of slide it off. So the shape is correct. Yeah, I learned everything from the Great British Bake Off about 5 years ago. I just started devouring that show, and I loved it, and never went back. So I'm self-taught, I guess, you know, watching Prue and Paul and Mary Berry, mainly Mary Berry. That's not really self-taught. I was taught by Mary Berry. Quite the credentials. Let's see. Poltiv asks, which recipe would you absolutely love to make but can't find equivalent ingredients for? That's a good question. It's not even that I can't find the ingredients, it's that I don't want to find the ingredients. So, I mean, anything with silphium from ancient Rome, I would love to make those things, but can't find silphium because it's extinct. But I'm still going to make them. I'm just going to use, you know, historians have come up with a couple different kind of things that would have been used instead of silphium, even when back then when silphium went extinct, because it went extinct back then, 2,000 years ago almost. We're going to put these into the oven. And we're going to put them into the oven for, it really kind of depends. And my oven is, you know, not great. Did I say to preheat the oven to 350 Fahrenheit? That's 175 Celsius. Yes. So we're going to put them in for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to start looking at them at about 15 minutes. Take a skewer. Once the skewer comes out, they're done. Sometimes they take a little bit longer, maybe up to like 18 minutes. But let's do this.
What are your plans for Viking recipes?
My plans for Viking recipes. So I have a few plans, actually. One, I just got a fantastic book from a viewer, sent it to me, called A Viking Meal. Oh, man. Last Meal. I can't remember the name of the book now, but it's basically several culinary historians kind of updated what they thought would be Viking recipes because the Vikings did not leave any recipes. So it's a lot of guesswork, but we know a lot of what they ate. We know a lot of what they were growing. So we can extrapolate kind of, and we do know later recipes from the same cultures where the Vikings mostly came from. So one of my plans is actually mead, which is going to be coming up very soon. Though I'm going to probably more equate it with Anglo-Saxon, but talk about, you know, the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings kind of dealing with mead. Again, the recipe comes from, I believe, the 1200s, so it's a bit later than the Vikings were around. But another thing with Viking food, I need to set a timer. Can you set a timer? 15 minutes. I did not think that through. So before we move to Vikings, there are a few things you can do with these donuts. You could put cinnamon and sugar on top. Mwah, delicious. But if you're like me and you're like Jose, we want some cream cheese frosting on our pumpkin donuts. So I'm going to make cream cheese frosting and show you how to do that. Oh, but no, going back to the Vikings. So the Vikings were not as monolithic, and we're learning even more now, recently, as monolithic as we usually think of. Yes, from Scandinavia at first, but they spread out. They were down in Sicily. They were in the Byzantine Empire, down where Turkey is now. They were the Varangian Guard who took care of guarded the Byzantine Emperor. They were in Russia. They were the Rus who invaded Russia. So the foods were incredibly varied. Obviously, what they were eating in Norway was not the same as what they were eating in Turkey. That said, usually when we think of Viking food, we think Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Orkneys, Iceland. So that's probably what I'll focus on. Okay, so for the icing, which is delicious, you need 1 block or 8 ounces or 224 grams of softened cream cheese. Softened is important. 1 stick of butter, and that is a half cup or 115 grams. A ton of powdered sugar, about 3 cups. And really, this is where you kind of can play on how thick you want your icing to be. It could be 3 cups. It could be 2 cups. It would just be more liquidy. If you want to like do a drizzle, go with 2 cups. You need just a large pinch of salt. That's a large pinch, like, maybe 3 fingers worth. And then, not necessary, but if you'd like, just some vanilla. I use 1 teaspoon. It keeps the icing white. Much more than that, and it starts to really get a yellow color. But that's all right. If you like vanilla, go with the yellow. So for this, we just put in the cream cheese and the butter. And we're going to use a hand mixer.
Gash Sneezing sends his regards. And Midnight Jazz says this channel is so comfy. And Pumpkin Doughnuts on a fall Sunday.
Thank you. Can you all hear Jose? I'm not sure if he's being picked up because he's saying some of the questions and some of the super chats, and I want to make sure that that you're getting heard. Yes, we hear him. Fantastic. Okay, so trying not to spill my water, we are going to mix our stuff. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit more history. So, donuts were still a fairly New England thing until World War I, when female volunteers, a lot of them from the Salvation Army, started bringing, or making donuts rather. I don't think they were bringing them over, but they were making donuts for our boys in the trenches over in France. It was a way to kind of remind them of home, as long as home was New England. But that's, I guess, where the Salvation Army at the point was based mostly. So they were giving out donuts to the boys in the trenches, and sometimes they were actually going up to the front lines. It wasn't like, oh, when you're on furlough, going to the back of the lines, you would have a donut. No, they were going to the trenches. These women bringing donuts, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of people think that that's actually where they got the term doughboys, which is what we called our foot soldiers during World War I. That is incorrect. They were actually called doughboys during the Civil War by the cavalrymen, who kind of used it as a bit of a knock. Why they'd call them doughboys, not entirely sure, but it possibly had to do with their buttons. They were like kind of large buttons that looked a little bit like lumps of dough, or supposedly they would use white flour to polish their white belts. I don't really see how that would work, but who knows? Maybe I'll polish a white belt and see. Yes, Jose.
I have 3 quick fire ones. Ollie Fox asked about Hungarian desserts. There's a lot of history there.
Hungarian desserts. I have a few ideas. Send me some.
Zilla says, are you going to do any video on Creole dishes?
Creole dishes. So I want to cover Creole dishes, but I want that to be a tasting history on the road. Yeah.
And Grace C has a suggestion that for Native American cuisine, you get in contact with Sean Sherman, who wrote the Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen.
Thank you. Yes, I do want to do Native American cuisine. I would love it if you would actually email me that at tastinghistorywithmaxmiller@gmail.com. Longest email name ever. I would really appreciate that because I do want to do some Native American cuisine. So we're going to add our vanilla. We're going to add our salz. And we're going to mix those in. So somebody had mentioned that, doing a fall dessert on a lovely fall morning, though it does not feel like fall here in Southern California. But fall and early winter are like my favorite cooking and baking times of the year. So we're going to slowly put this in and slowly beat it. Otherwise, it will go everywhere. And also don't put it all in at once, because then you'll be able to gauge exactly how thick you want it. So maybe like a cup at a time. Anyway, so since it's fall and different holidays are coming up, Halloween, All Souls Day, Thanksgiving, at least here in the US, and of course, Christmas and Hanukkah. For the next couple months, I'm going to be really focusing, not entirely, but really focusing on holiday traditions, holiday foods, because there are just so many, and the histories behind them are fantastic, and I really relate with them. So, I don't want to give too much away, but somebody had actually asked, who was it? Chris Balseric had asked if I was going to be doing some holiday episodes, and he had mentioned something for Samhain or Halloween. Well, I'm doing something for Samhain and Halloween. I'm going to be doing soul cakes, medieval plum pudding for Christmas. So, interesting thing about plum pudding is it really didn't start to become associated with Christmas until A Christmas Carol, when Miss Cratchit made her plum pudding for Christmas Day. And a couple years later, Eliza Acton put out her cookbook, Modern Cookery for Private Families, and she was the one who said, I'm going to capitalize on Mr. Dickens' work and call this Christmas pudding. She actually had several recipes in it for Christmas pudding, and it was just basically different versions of plum pudding. So yeah, I'm going to be doing that. And what's really cool is I had a viewer send me an early edition of Eliza Acton's Modern Cookery. It's the first early cookbook that I've ever owned. I think it's a second or third edition from 1851. And it just, can I tell you, I don't know if y'all feel this way about books, but I love books in general. But one of my favorite things about books is how they smell. When you go into a library or a bookstore, they have bookstores still, but the smell of books. And this book smells so good. It smells like, I don't know, it smells like history in England. It's just, it's fantastic. And you can actually see like the fingerprints on the pages of 150 years of people using this book. It's amazing. Yes, Jose.
Professor Yana sends her love and the occasional pun.
Thank you.
John Russell asks about your classic voice, if you could sing something quickly.
If I could sing something quickly. Oh, it's so early. So mostly now what I sing, I ended up going into musical theater actually, but now mostly what I sing is early music. So kind of Renaissance, medieval music. I mean, is it really a surprise? But maybe I'll sing for you. Maybe I won't. We'll see.
B. Stoker said that the person that invented the donut is buried near their house. A captain looks like. And thank you for making history and cooking cool.
Person who invented the donut? A captain, he says, buried near his house. So I'm guessing it was the person who made that hole in the donut. So that's very cool. Are you in New England, I wonder? I'm assuming.
Anthony says we need recipes from medieval Eastern Europe.
Medieval Eastern European recipes. They might be coming up. It also depends on how far east you're talking. Like, are you talking Poland or are you talking like Byzantium? Either way, things are coming. So interesting story. Donuts really, so after World War I, when the doughboys were coming back to America, they wanted these donuts that they had been eating in the trenches. And in New York, there was actually a Russian immigrant named Adolf Levitt who invented in the early 20s a donut machine. So he could pump donuts out a lot faster because he was in Broadway, on Broadway was his store. And so as theater patrons would come out during the intermission, he would sell them a bunch of donuts. So he needed to make them on the fly. So the first donut machine, was made in the 1920s. By 1931, he was making $25 million a year. In 1931, that's an unbelievable amount of money, especially making donuts, because he was shipping them all over the country, and I guess probably selling his patent for or licensing his patent for this donut machine. So in 1931, the New Yorker gave him a write-up. I love this. We can tell you a little about the donut making place in Broadway. Donuts float dreamily through a grease canal in a glass enclosed machine. Walk dreamily up a moving ramp and tumble dreamily into an outgoing basket. Interesting, and I'm guessing this was written before there were any synonyms for dreamily. 3 times in one sentence? That seems a little overkill. That same year, 1931, at the World's Fair in Chicago, donuts were acclaimed as the food hit of the century of progress. And I would have to agree. They are the food hit of the century of progress. So now we have our icing. Honestly, this is probably enough for like 2 batches of donuts, but who's going to just use a half? You know, it's like, because it's a whole thing of cream cheese and a whole thing of butter, it's just easy enough. And it stays for a while, so you can either put it on other things that you're making, wonderful on gingerbread or whatever, or just put it into the refrigerator and every few hours go take a taste. That's what I do.
Tender Overcast has a tip. Place your prepared piping bag into a drinking glass and roll the extra over the cup edge so you have an internal edge to scrape your filling into.
That is a very good idea. I am going to try that. My thing is, I need a piping bag holder, but actually maybe like a large cup would work, because what I end up doing is once I've got the stuff in the piping bag, I set the piping bag down and it just like oozes out. I know that there are ways to get that to stop happening. I just don't know what they are.
Stan Brown 32 asks if your plans for a cookbook, maybe a Kickstarter.
Plans for a cookbook, maybe a Kickstarter. I do have plans for a cookbook. I'm not there yet because the show is just taking up all my time, but it's a definite must. It's kind of how I want it to work, because I don't want it to just be recipes. I want it to also have the wonderful anecdotes of history that I obviously love so much. So kind of figuring out how to make that work. If you have any suggestions, I'm fair game.
Dan's asking, have you ever heard of Cooking with Kuchen, and would you ever make a video on it?
Cooking with Kuchen. Oh, Kuchen. I'm guessing it's like, is that German for cake? Kuchen? Yes. I don't know exactly. If you have a more specific, like if you have a recipe or a link to a description, send it my way, and it will make it on the list. So the list of dishes that I have has grown exponentially. That said, do keep sending me recommendations, because several upcoming episodes are based on your recommendations. Because sometimes I'll read something and it's just like, yes, the history is perfect, or the timing is perfect, or I've always wanted to make this. So keep sending them my way. You can send them on Twitter or Instagram, but the best is via email, tastinghistorywithmaxmiller@gmail.com. How long do we have on the donuts?
Oh, right. 35 seconds. All right.
35 seconds.
Jack Bowe, will you sing Summer Is Coming In?
Summer is coming in. So that's Middle English. I cannot remember all the words except for summer is coming in. That's about it. So when it's time to take out the donuts, or when it's time to start checking on them, it's nice to have a wooden skewer. As soon as it comes out clean, you poke it in the donut, take it out clean. It's just like any other cake. If it comes out clean, they're ready. Let's take a look. Well, that is clean as clean can be. So
there it goes.
Let's take it out. Like I said, if they're not ready, don't take them out. But mine are ready.
Libralia wants to thank you for history, for your lessons, because they are infectious. And I get some love too.
Thank you. And nice for Jose as well. So take them out, put them on, first of all, turn off your oven, especially if your AC is out, because it's freaking hot. Take them out, put them on the top of the oven or on an oven rack for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to turn them out. Turning them out before that, they will definitely stick. They might stick even if not. Usually there's always one sucker who refuses to come out of the donut pan. I don't know what I did with the cooling racks. I had them. Are they over there? He took my cooling racks. Can't work in these conditions. A little more history, though it's not really history. It's just kind of a fun little tidbit about donuts. So, in the 1934 movie, this is just after the write-up about the dreamily floating donuts. There was a movie called It Happened One Night. If you've never seen it, you must see it. It's absolutely charming. It's with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. And in it, Clark Gable teaches Claudette Colbert's character how to dunk a donut. And it's important because it's the first time that we really see it like in a Hollywood movie or in, it's starting to make its way into the zeitgeist of American culture. So this is what he says in the movie. Dunkin's an art. Don't let it soak so long and dip and plop into your mouth. If you let it soak too long, it'll get soft and fall off. It's all a matter of timing. I ought to write a book about it. I just love that. Love Clark Gable. And then in 1937, Vernon Rudolph and two of his friends in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with $25 in their pockets between the three of them, got a bunch of potatoes and eggs and milk and sugar and made donuts. Potatoes in their donuts. Interesting. And what they ended up doing was selling them out of the back of their 1936 Pontiac. And what they called them were Krispy Kreme donuts. And so that is the beginning of Krispy Kreme donuts. What's funny is that they were doing this in July in North Carolina. And so it was really, really hot. And so while they were baking, they took off pretty much all their clothes down to their skivvies to bake the donuts. So I'm guessing one, they didn't tell the people they were selling them that, but also probably wouldn't pass the Food and Drug Administration guidelines today. But it's fun. It was 1937. There are no rules.
Max Fairley wants you to fight his dad.
Knife fight your dad? No. I wouldn't knife fight anyone. First of all, I'd lose. Second of all, I don't want to hurt my face, get cut. And third of all, my knife skills, not great. Not great in the kitchen, I'm going to guess. Not great fighting either.
And Thomas Bevel has a recommendation.
Yes.
The cookbook, Michael Abelman's Field of Plenty.
Michael Abelman's Field of Plenty. I do not know it. I will have to look into it. I'll add that onto my Amazon list of books that I need, which people have been sending me, and it's just awesome. I had a few other questions from others. Sarah asked, do I have a cookbook? I already talked about that one. Allison Harvey, seeing as we are both British baking show fans, is there a bake they showcase that you would have wanted to dive deeper into? There is. There was an episode where they did a Victorian tennis cake, and they talked about the cake, which was really cool. But they didn't really talk about the history of it, and it's a really weird cake. It looks like a tennis court, and I want to know more about why it exists. And I haven't done any research on it, but I will one of these days. Did you have something, Jose?
Yeah. Renzi79 sends his love.
Thank you, Renzi79.
And Stan Brown's is happy you cited It Happened One Night.
It Happened One Night. It's just a charming movie. I grew up, I spent a lot of time over at my Nana's, and she always had Turner Classic Movies on, because she had cable. We didn't have cable. But she had cable. She splurged, and always had Turner Classic Movies on, or she had tons and tons of VHSs that she had recorded off the TV. So I watched a lot of movies with commercials growing up, and TV versions. But so old movies like that from the 30s and 40s and 50s, I just love. All my favorite, not all of them, but most of my favorite movies are things like All About Eve and Casablanca and Bringing Up Baby and stuff. So
the chat wants to know about your history research process.
My history research process. I really wish that it was that it was so easily defined. It's kind of different for every episode. Typically, lately, I've been starting with the research more than the dish. Not always. Sometimes the dish comes first, but a lot of times I've been finding a story because I've been researching other things for other episodes. I'll come across a story that I'm like, oh, I need to dive deeper into that. And then as I dive deeper into that, I find something that's like, oh, there is a food that would be perfect for this. And so I find a recipe or whatever. So that's always the start. But the best part of any book, history book, is not what's in the book. It's actually what's in the back of the book. It's the bibliography, because that is where they cite their sources and where they cite their primary sources. And I love primary sources. So that's kind of where I start, is when I get a history book, I go to the back and I start going through the bibliography and try to find those sources. It also gives a little credence because, if you're just doing all of your research online and blogs and stuff, and there's a lot of great stuff online, like it's, the most valuable tool, but there's also a lot of misinformation online. So you really need to find those published works that hopefully they did a little more due diligence doing. Yes?
Gina and JB post them their love, but also people want to see the Pokemon. They can't see it. So
it's because I'm in a way. So, okay. Oh, it's also the pumpkin. I got a pumpkin. But my big ass has been standing in the way the whole time. So we were actually thinking about putting, because there is a pumpkin Pokemon, but we don't have it. But we did have this little guy. I don't know how well you can see him. Shield the light here. He's so cute. So there's that one. It's Pikachu playing in leaves. And then we also have over here, it's a little early, I guess, but he has pumpkin pie. And it's Pikachu sleeping in a cornucopia. You guys, it's just too cute. And look at his little face. Can you see it? Ah! Anyway, we didn't want to put the plushies up here because I'm like got oil and eggs and stuff. Make a big old mess. So the frosting. Okay, so it's actually about time. Let me take these and turn them out, and very likely be really embarrassed on the internet as they stick. But let's see if they don't. So, all right. Can you even see this? I don't know. Maybe it's off camera. It might be the best thing.
Oh no! Oh, there's one.
You got one. You gotta give them a little. You gotta give them a little tap. They're actually doing all right. They look good. If I had piped these in, it would actually work even better. Because they're a little bit more perfect when you pipe them in. But let me show these to you. So, like I said, sometimes the hole gets covered up, so you gotta make that all nice and clean. But here we have our donuts, and they're just wonderful. Now, if you want to ice them, which we do, you can't ice them until they're fully cooled. So we're going to give them a few minutes, and then honestly, I'm probably not going to ice them when you probably should, because they're just not going to have time to cool. We'd be here for too long. So when I put the icing on, it'll probably just slip off, but it's still going to be delicious. I do suggest piping on the icing. It just for prettiness sake, You can feel them coming out. There's always one. See? There's always one. Dun, dun, dun. It doesn't want to come out. But there we go. 12 lovely donuts. And so there's a bit more in there. I could probably have made like 2 more donuts. So there's always a little bit extra left. Baker's dozen, as they say. That would be 1 more donut, 13. So we'll give this a moment. Another cool thing, if you want to go really fancy, is some little pecan or walnut chips just topped on. It can overwhelm the flavor. So be really, really light on them. Actually, in the picture that you'll see, like the picture that I posted, there were too many. It looked nice, but they overwhelm the flavor, especially if you're using pecan. It's a little bit of stronger taste. So use sparingly. Did we have any more questions?
talk about the swan you want to do.
The swan I want to do. So the other day I was doing an interview, very fortunate to get to do that, and they asked me something that I would love to do, but like that's, you know, it would be like season finale, and it is a roast swan. In the Middle Ages, and I think more so during the Renaissance, you see these pictures of an entire roast swan with its feathers. And I want to do that. I want to figure out how to do that. It probably would look terrible. It would look flat, you know, when I do it. But I really want to do it someday. But one, I kind of, it hurts me to kill it. I mean, I wouldn't kill the swan, but even to buy a dead swan, because they're so beautiful. They're ill-tempered. So maybe I could just remember swans and geese are not nice birds. So that might work. But also, I would need to get a much bigger oven. You really need like a hearth, you know, to have this entire swan being roasted. So I bet though there is, I think he's called the Tudor Kitchen. There's a guy in England. His last name is Fitch. Look him up. Google Tudor Kitchen Fitch. He does some of the most fantastic recreations of Tudor style dishes because he actually has a Tudor style like mammoth kitchen or access to one, including a giant hearth. And so he will make these things. And I would love to, when I'm able to travel again, go over there and work with him and see, you know, maybe we could make a swan and he could show me how to refeather a bird.
Two things. Would putting it in the fridge help it cool faster?
Would putting it in the fridge help it quicker? Taking it off the oven will definitely help it cool faster. So there is that, but you know, you don't want it to cool too fast. Yeah, it would cool faster in the fridge. I've done that before, and it always tends to make it a little chewy. I haven't done it with the pumpkins, but I've done it with like cakes and stuff. You got to kind of wait for it to cool on its own and then chill it. Then you know, especially if you're doing a cake and you need to slice it, chill the cake and then the crumbs won't matter. But maybe there's a way to do it. I don't know.
Here's a good question. Any misconceptions about historical cooking that irk you? Like in the Middle Ages, they only eat porridge and stews and they're plague doctors.
Historical little tidbits that irk me. First of all, there's a guy named the Fake History Hunter on Twitter who, if you're not following, go follow him. He's amazing. He literally just goes through Twitter and finds fake history facts. One thing that bugs me, and it's, this one's not food related, but it's the plague doctors. You see the pictures of the plague doctors with the beak that they would fill with herbs and other things. And those existed, but not in the Middle Ages. Those didn't come around until, I believe, the late 15 or even early 1600s. So when the plague really came back rampant during the time of like Samuel Pepys in England in the 1650s and 60s, that's when those plague doctors were around. They weren't around during the Black Death, you know. It just didn't happen. Another thing that always kind of irks me is about, and the thing is, it doesn't always ring true for everywhere, but some people will say, you know, salt was very expensive. It was very expensive for some people, and it wasn't very expensive for other people. It really depended on where you lived, because just like gas prices today, but to the nth degree, getting a commodity to a certain place was the most expensive part of its setting its price. So if you lived really, really far away from a salt mine or from the ocean, you know, it's going to be more expensive.
What about sugar?
Sugar. Oh, that's the big one. That's the big one. Yeah. So I get a lot of comments, people saying, they didn't have sugar in medieval times. Sugar is a New World food. Sugar is an Old World food. Well, first of all, sugar can mean a lot of things. Honey is sugar, you know, but sugar cane is an Old World food. I don't want to give too much information about it because I am doing not one, but 2 episodes coming up on sugar because the history is fantastic, dark, complex, and wonderful. But sugar cane is an old world food, and it actually didn't come over to the New World until Christopher Columbus brought it over to grow in Hispaniola. So it was extremely expensive, though, for pretty much everyone. From India and China, though less expensive, but unbelievably expensive in the Middle East, and astronomically expensive in places like England and Germany and Italy. So they did use it, though, but only the very wealthy. Everyone else just used honey, and that's fine. Any more?
People want to know about your baking fails.
My baking fails. And how much do I want to share here? So I think my biggest 2 baking fails happened back to back. It was heartbreaking, and I've had a lot of things end up in that trash can, I promise you. But 2 of my biggest baking fails were actually a rose apple pie, where instead of using this was when I first started baking. I did not know the difference between rose water and rose oil. And if anyone knows the difference, it's like 1 cup of rose water equals 1 drop of rose oil. So it called for 2 tablespoons of rose water. And I thought, this is astronomically expensive. This is like a $40 ingredient. No, it should have been like $3 worth of rose water, if that. But I used rose oil, and the whole house just smelled like potpourri for days. It was a lot. And then like the next week, I made a blueberry pie, and the blueberries, the top, I spent hours making the crust and designing it like blueberry vines. It was gorgeous. It looked so good. I cooked it, and it came out, smelled fantastic, but the top hadn't really gotten enough color. So I was like, how do we color this a little bit more? And I thought, I'll put the broiler on it.
That was my fault. I suggested the broiler.
I wasn't going to rat him out, but yes, Jose suggested the broiler. Well, it would have worked if I had known how long to do it, but it turns out like, it was a couple minutes.
Like 2 minutes.
Like a minute or 2 under the broiler, and the apartment was just filled with smoke. That pie was done. it was rough. I had spent hours on it. I still lose sleep over that one. Let's feel these donuts. They're actually pretty cool on top, and that's all that we need for our icing. So let's take, like I said, it's best to pipe these, but I'm not going to. I'm going to, because you're there, I'm going to just do it right in front of you on camera and take some of this sweet, sweet nectar and just kind of spread it on top. Like I said, they're probably pastry chefs. If there are any pastry chefs watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're having to watch this because it's probably, things that irk you. Because that's not pretty. It doesn't matter because I'm going to eat it right away. And then we take some nuts, very few nuts, and we put a couple on. More than a couple, but really just a few. Getting the light off. Just a few nuts. Any more than that, and it's going to overpower it. But here we go, tasting one of my favorite things, baked pumpkin donuts. It's so autumnal, y'all. I wonder why I'm putting on weight. They're so good. They're just so good. They're not fried donuts. The texture is more like cake, but it's really light and tender cake because of the oil. Yeah, they're wonderful. You should make them. They're really easy. I did it during a live stream, and it's only been an hour. You could probably do it even faster. So I suggest you do just that. So we're about out of time, but were there any more questions that we need to get to?
People still want to hear you sing one more thing.
Want to hear me sing one more thing?
Happy birthday.
Singing happy birthday. It's not my birthday. There's a wonderful song that, again, I'm terrible with lyrics. I forget them all the time, but there's a really great song. I remember kind of a Renaissance madrigal about Robin Hood. Robin Hood. See, I can't remember the lyrics. Darn it. But early one morn while the sun was arising, I saw a fair maid in the valley below. Oh, don't deceive me. Oh, never leave me. How could you use our poor maiden so? I'm really curious what they did to this poor maiden to make her opine. How was she used? I don't know. The cool thing about like Renaissance madrigals, because you think of them, oh, they're so sweet, you know, little madrigal. They're all about sex. Every last one of them. They would use words and kind of nonsense words to imply certain actions. They were all always about like shepherds and the milkmaid and stuff like that. And then they would say things like, you know, lodololly or something like that. And lodololly meant, you know, but yeah, there it is. Let's bring over Jamie before we say goodbye.
Finish your donuts. Dan Brown sends more love. And as a
Thank you, Dan Brown.
To people for the musical episode, we gotta get to 1 million.
Musical episode at 1 million followers, subscribers, yes. A reminder too, if you want merch, it's going to start this Tuesday. It's going to roll out over the next few weeks. It's going to get more complex. I'm really excited about it. And those are the big things. Let me grab Jamie because he's just so freaking cute.
The cat's ass.
Cersei doesn't like to be on camera, but just to pull it in. Oh, he's just so sweet. Oh, he's just so sweet. He is one of the most, he's just an awesome cat. He always wants to be in the thick of it. That's why we have to actually put him upstairs during all this, because he would be up here. He wouldn't be up here, but he would be at my feet. I'd be tripping over him because he just wants to be everywhere. All right. Thank you all so much. It's been an hour. I'm going to let you go. Have your day. Go make pumpkin donuts. Share those pictures with me on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram is Tasting History with Max Miller. Twitter is Tasting History 1. I love to see him. It's actually my favorite part of this, seeing you guys making the dishes. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your September, and I will see you in October with a lot of wonderful holiday episodes coming up. Bye.